What would you do if you found a wallet containing $10,000 in cash when you had exactly $17 to your name and hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days? 22-year-old college student Jake Martinez faced exactly that choice on a freezing Tuesday morning in Chicago. He had no idea that the wallet belonged to billionaire tech mogul Catherine Webb, or that she'd left it there intentionally as part of a social experiment testing human honesty under extreme pressure. What Jake did next, and what Catherine revealed afterward, will completely change how you think about integrity, desperation, and what people are really capable of when no one is watching. Jake Martinez was in his final semester at Northwestern University, studying engineering on a patchwork of scholarships that covered tuition but left nothing for living expenses. He worked 3 part-time jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and survived on ramen noodles and whatever free food he could find at campus events. That particular morning, he was walking to his 6 a.m. janitorial shift at a downtown office building, the kind of job that starts before the wealthy arrive and ends before they notice the people who clean up after them. The November wind cut through his thin jacket, a reminder that winter was coming and he still hadn't figured out how to afford a proper coat. That's when he saw it. A leather wallet lying on the sidewalk near the entrance to a luxury hotel. Jake's first instinct was to walk past it. Getting involved in other people's problems felt like a risk he couldn't afford. But something made him stop and pick it up. When he opened it to look for identification, his heart stopped. Inside were multiple credit cards with the name Catherine Webb, several business cards identifying her as CEO of Webb Technologies, a driver's license, and a stack of $100 bills that Jake counted 3 times because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. $10,000. Cash. More money than he'd seen in his entire life, sitting in his hands on a deserted street corner at dawn. Jake stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 30 seconds. His mind raced through possibilities with the desperate speed of someone who'd spent years calculating survival. $10,000 could pay his rent for a year. It could buy groceries, a winter coat, textbooks he'd been sharing with classmates because he couldn't afford his own. It could mean he wouldn't have to work 3 jobs and could actually focus on his studies for once. Nobody had seen him pick up the wallet. Nobody would ever know. The voice of desperation whispered that this was the universe finally giving him a break after years of struggle. But there was another voice, quieter but more insistent. It was his mother's voice, remembering the values she'd instilled in him when they'd had even less than he had now. Maria Martinez had raised Jake alone after his father died, working as a housekeeper to keep him fed and in school. She'd always told him, "Mijo, we may not have money, but we have our integrity. That's something nobody can take from you, and something you should never give away, no matter how hard life gets." Jake thought about how disappointed she'd be if he kept money that wasn't his, regardless of how desperately he needed it. According to research from behavioral economist Dan Ariely, about 20% of people will cheat or steal if given the opportunity and 0 consequences. Another 20% will remain honest regardless of circumstances or temptation. The remaining 60% are what Ariely calls flexibly honest, people whose choices depend on context, pressure, and justification. Jake was being tested on which category he truly belonged to, though he didn't know he was being tested at all. He was simply a broke college student standing on a cold street corner, holding more money than he'd earned in 6 months of backbreaking work, deciding who he wanted to be. Jake took out his phone with shaking hands and searched for Catherine Webb. What he found was intimidating. Articles about her billion-dollar company, photos of her at charity galas and tech conferences, interviews where she discussed innovation and philanthropy. She was someone who operated in a world so far removed from his own that they might as well have lived on different planets. But she was also someone who'd lost her wallet and probably needed it back, regardless of whether $10,000 meant anything to her. Jake called the main number for Webb Technologies, was transferred 3 times, and finally reached an assistant who sounded deeply skeptical that some random caller actually had Catherine Webb's wallet. 2 hours later, Jake found himself in the lobby of Webb Technologies, still wearing his janitor's uniform because he didn't have time to change before his next shift. He clutched the wallet like it was evidence in a crime he didn't commit, acutely aware that he looked nothing like the tech entrepreneurs and venture capitalists flowing through the gleaming glass building. When Catherine Webb herself came down to meet him instead of sending security, he nearly dropped the wallet in shock. She was dressed in an elegant suit that probably cost more than his entire year's rent, but her expression was warm and intensely curious. "You're Jake Martinez?" she asked, extending her hand. "The young man who found my wallet?" Jake nodded, too overwhelmed to speak coherently, and handed over the wallet. Catherine opened it, checked the contents with careful attention, and then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Everything's here. All the cards, all the cash. You didn't take anything." It wasn't quite a question, but Jake answered anyway. "No, ma'am. It's not mine to take." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made Jake deeply uncomfortable. "Can you spare an hour? I'd like to buy you breakfast and talk." Over breakfast at a quiet cafe near the office, Catherine revealed the truth. The wallet had been left intentionally as part of a social experiment she'd been conducting for the past year. She'd been leaving wallets in various locations around Chicago, each containing $10,000 and her real information, to see what ordinary people would do when faced with that choice. She'd worked with a private investigation firm to track each wallet and document what happened. The results had been devastating. Of the 23 wallets she'd left in the past year, only 3 had been returned with all contents intact. 17 had been kept entirely. 3 had been returned with the cards, but not the cash, the finders apparently assuming she wouldn't notice or wouldn't care about money she could easily replace. "Do you know what makes you different from most people, Jake?" Catherine asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Jake shook his head, feeling increasingly surreal about this entire situation. "You had every justification to keep that money. You're clearly struggling financially. You found it on a public street where anyone could have taken it. You could have told yourself, 'I wouldn't miss it,' that I have plenty, that the universe was giving you a break you deserved. And you would have been right about all of that. But you returned it anyway, knowing you'd get nothing in return except the knowledge that you'd done the right thing. That kind of integrity is rarer than you think, especially among people who have reason to be bitter about their circumstances." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought of himself as particularly special or virtuous. He'd just done what his mother had taught him, what felt right despite the howling need that had tempted him otherwise. Catherine continued, "I started this experiment because I wanted to understand something about human nature. I've spent my entire career around wealthy people, and I've seen how money can corrupt integrity. But I also wanted to know whether poverty forced people into dishonesty, whether desperate people could afford to be honest, or whether integrity existed independent of circumstance. You've helped me understand that character isn't about what you have. It's about who you choose to be when choosing differently would be easy and justifiable." Then Catherine said something that made Jake's heart race. "I'm offering you a full-time position at Web Technologies, starting immediately. We'll work around your class schedule until you graduate, then you'll transition to full-time. The salary is $85,000 a year, with full benefits, and I'm personally paying off your student loans. I'm not doing this as charity or as a reward for returning my wallet. I'm doing it because your actions this morning demonstrated the kind of character I've spent years trying to find in candidates with perfect resumes and prestigious connections. Integrity under pressure is the rarest commodity in business, and you've proven you have it in abundance." Jake sat in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what had just happened. A few hours ago, he'd been a broke student contemplating whether to steal money he desperately needed. Now he was being offered a life-changing opportunity he never could have imagined. "Why?" he finally managed to ask. "Why go through all this? Why not just hire people through normal channels?" Catherine smiled. "Because resumes and interviews tell me what people want me to know about them. This experiment shows me who they actually are when they think nobody's watching and nothing's at stake except their own conscience. You passed a test you didn't know you were taking, and that's precisely why your response matters." Jake accepted the position, and the trajectory of his entire life changed in a single morning. He graduated with honors, became a successful engineer at Web Technologies, and eventually started his own company focused on creating opportunities for first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. But more importantly, he became living proof that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, can lead to outcomes you never imagined possible. His mother cried when he told her the story, not because of the job or the money, but because her son had honored the values she'd worked so hard to instill when doing so had required real sacrifice, Catherine's experiment revealed uncomfortable truths about human behavior under pressure. The data showed that people with higher incomes were actually more likely to keep the wallet than people with lower incomes, contradicting the common assumption that poverty drives dishonesty. The research suggested that wealth can create a sense of entitlement and distance from consequences, while people who've experienced struggle often maintain stronger ethical frameworks because they understand how much integrity matters when you have little else. These findings challenge decades of assumptions about class, character, and morality. The story went public when Catherine published her research findings in a behavioral economics journal. The response was explosive, with people debating the ethics of the experiment, the conclusions Catherine drew, and what it revealed about society's values. Some criticized Catherine for manipulating people in vulnerable situations. Others argued that understanding human behavior requires exactly these kinds of real-world tests where the stakes are genuine and the choices matter. But everyone agreed on one thing: Jake Martinez's decision to return that wallet, despite having every reason and justification to keep it, represented something rare and valuable that transcended economics or self-interest. This story forces us to confront a question we'd rather avoid. What would we do in Jake's position? It's easy to claim we'd make the right choice when we're comfortable and not facing real desperation. But integrity isn't tested when choices are easy. It's tested precisely when doing the right thing costs you something you desperately need, when nobody would know if you chose differently, when you have every justification to act in self-interest. Those are the moments that reveal who we actually are beneath the person we tell ourselves we want to be. Jake's choice that morning wasn't just about returning a wallet. It was about refusing to let circumstances dictate character, about honoring values even when they're inconvenient, about believing that integrity matters more than immediate relief from suffering. And the remarkable thing is that his integrity created opportunities that keeping the money never could have. Not because virtue always leads to material reward, but because character opens doors that talent and desperation cannot. So here's what I want you to consider. Who are you when nobody's watching? What choices do you make when acting differently would be easy and justifiable? And what values do you hold on to even when letting them go would solve immediate problems? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're tests we face constantly in small ways that reveal our actual character. If this story challenged you, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that makes us think deeply about who we are and who we want to be. Comment below about times when you faced similar choices or when integrity cost you something but proved worthwhile. And remember Jake's decision on that cold morning, standing on a street corner with 10,000 reasons to compromise and one reason to stay true to himself. That reason was enough.